I am a woman in my mid-30s, seemingly ordinary and accommodating to those who don't know me well. Friends describe me as a pragmatic one, with a sharp mind for numbers and a talent for solving problems that others find insurmountable. My apartment in downtown Chicago is minimalist and functional. My wardrobe consists mainly of well-tailored suits in neutral colors, and my social media presence is practically non-existent. To casual acquaintances, I'm just another finance professional climbing the corporate ladder, distinguished only by my occasional dry wit and the fact that I never talk about my family. My relationship with my parents seemed normal until I turned 25. The Santos family restaurant, Saber di Casa, had been a fixture in Chicago's Little Village neighborhood for 30 years. My father, Miguel, started it with recipes from his mother's kitchen in Mexico City, and my mother, Elena, turned it from a hole-in-the-wall taqueria into a local institution through sheer force of will and an uncompromising dedication to authenticity. My older brother Marco took to the kitchen, naturally inheriting our father's talent for coaxing remarkable flavors from simple ingredients. My younger sister Lucia embraced the front of house, her natural charm making every customer feel like family. And then there was me, Isabella Santos, the middle child with a head for numbers who was supposed to handle the books. I played my part dutifully through high school and college, spending weekends and summers tracking inventory, managing payroll, and finding increasingly creative ways to stretch our thin margins a little further. When I graduated with my finance degree, it was assumed I would step into a full-time role at Saber di Casa. The fact that I had other aspiration was irrelevant to my mother. The family comes first, Isabella, she would say, her voice leaving no room for disagreement. Always! I began noticing strange behaviors when I tried to implement modern accounting systems. At the restaurant, each suggestion for improvement was met with resistance, particularly from my mother. "We've always done it this way" became her mantra, even when this way meant keeping records in physical ledgers and calculating taxes manually, increasing the risk of costly errors. When I mentioned that most restaurants our size had switched to digital inventory systems, she dismissed the idea as unnecessary. "I know exactly what we have and what we need," she insisted. Despite the growing pile of expired ingredients, I would discover hidden in the back of our walk-in refrigerator. What my family didn't realize about me was that I had expertise that extended far beyond basic bookkeeping. During college, I had interned at one of Chicago's top financial consulting firms, where I'd specialized in helping struggling small businesses restructure their operations. I understood cash flow projections, tax optimization, and strategic growth planning. I could see that Saber di Casa was operating on increasingly thin margins as competition grew, and the neighborhood gentrified, driving up our rent. 3 new modern Mexican restaurants had opened within a 5-block radius in the past year alone, each with sleek decor and craft cocktail menus that attracted the younger, wealthier residents moving into the area. "We need to adapt," I told my parents during a particularly tense family meeting. My spreadsheets and projections spread across the table we used for staff meals. "The restaurant industry is changing. We need to update our systems, consider expansion opportunities, maybe even look into catering services or packaged food options for retail." My father looked intrigued, his weathered hands tracing the growth charts I prepared. He had always been the more flexible one, open to new ideas if they were presented with clear reasoning. But my mother's expression hardened with each word I spoke, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, a position one recognized from countless childhood disagreements. "This is not some corporate experiment, Isabella," she said, her accent becoming more pronounced as it always did when she was angry. "This is our family's legacy. We serve food the way my husband's mother taught him, in a place where our community can feel at home. We don't need fancy cocktails or computerized inventory systems to do that." "That community is changing, Mom," I argued, trying to keep frustration from my voice. "And if we don't change with it, we won't survive another 5 years. The numbers don't lie." I pointed to the profit margin trends, which had been steadily declining for the past 8 quarters. "We're working harder for less money every month." The explosion that followed still echoes in my memory. My mother, always a picture of controlled strength, unleashed years of pent-up frustration. According to her, I had always been the difficult one, too caught up in my education to appreciate our heritage, too ambitious to respect tradition. "You think your fancy degree makes you smarter than the rest of us?" she demanded, slamming her hand on my carefully prepared reports. "Numbers on a page aren't what feeds our customers. Numbers don't create the recipes that bring people back for 30 years. My brother Marco nodded in agreement, loyal as always to her mother's perspective. Lucia stared at the floor, unwilling to take sides. My father attempted to mediate, but his gentle Elena, "Perhaps we should consider some of Isabella's ideas," only redirected my mother's anger toward him. When I tried to explain that numbers were precisely what would allow us to keep serving those recipes for another 30 years, she delivered the blow that ultimately severed our relationship. You're not committed to this family. You never have been. If you walk away from Sabre de Casa, you're walking away from everything we built, everything we are. It wasn't framed as a choice, but I recognized the ultimatum beneath her words. Stay and surrender my ambitions to her vision, or leave and confirm what she'd apparently always suspected, that I was, at my core, disloyal to the family that had sacrificed everything to give me opportunities. I chose to leave. I discovered the depth of her rejection when I was offered a position at Merrill Lynch. The following week, when I called home with what I thought was exciting news, my father answered with uncharacteristic coolness. Your mother doesn't want to speak to you, he said, his voice heavy with disappointment. She says you've made your choice. The finality of his tone made it clear that, in my mother's eyes, leaving the family business wasn't just a career decision, it was a betrayal that rendered me effectively dead to her. My sister Lucia tried to mediate, meeting me for coffee a few weeks later, but eventually admitted that taking my side would only jeopardize her own standing in the family. You know how Mom is, she said apologetically. She sees this as choosing between her and your career. There's no middle ground. My brother Marco, always closer to our mother, stopped returning my calls entirely, and so I did what pragmatic people do. I adapted. I threw myself into my new career with the same intensity my mother had always devoted to the restaurant. Within 3 years, I had moved from Merrill Lynch to a boutique consulting firm specializing in restaurant financing and development. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was helping other family restaurants achieve exactly what my mother had refused to let me do for ours. By 30, I had established my own consulting agency, Santos Financial Solutions, with a client list that included some of Chicago's most successful independent restaurants and small chains. I had a team of 6 employees, a sleek office in the financial district, and a reputation for turning around struggling establishments. With a combination of financial restructuring and strategic modernization, my personal life was less developed. I dated occasionally, maintained a small circle of close friends, and visited my father once a month for awkward lunches, where we carefully avoided mentioning my mother or siblings. He would update me on their lives anyway. Marco was now head chef. Lucia had married and had a daughter. The restaurant was doing fine. I never pressed for details, and he never offered them. This strained détente was the most I could hope for. I told myself, some bridges once burned cannot be rebuilt. On the 10th anniversary of my departure from Sabre de Casa, I received an unexpected visitor at my office. My assistant buzzed to inform me that a walk-in client was insisting on seeing me without an appointment. She says she's family, he added, confusion evident in his voice. I had never mentioned family to anyone at work. When the door opened, revealing my mother standing uncertainly in the entrance, I momentarily forgot how to breathe. Elena Santos had aged in the decades since I'd seen her last. Her once jet black hair now streaked with silver, new lines etched around her eyes and mouth. But her posture remained ramrod straight, her gaze as direct and uncompromising as ever. Isabella, she said, her voice betraying no emotion. We need to talk. I gestured to the chair across from my desk, struggling to maintain my professional composure. Please sit. She remained standing, taking in the awards on my wall, the view of the city from my window, the elegant furnishings that spoke of success. You've done well for yourself, she said finally. Yes, I agreed, unsure what else to say. What does one say to a mother who has effectively disowned them for a decade? Sabre de Casa is in trouble, she continued, each word clearly costing her something in pride. Serious trouble. I'd suspected as much. Through industry connections, I'd heard rumors of declining customer numbers, of neighboring businesses being bought out by developers. But I hadn't allowed myself to investigate further, knowing I couldn't bear the knowledge without taking action, and believing that any action from me would be rejected. What kind of trouble? I asked carefully. Financial, primarily. She finally took the seat I'd offered, though she perched on its edge as if ready to flee at any moment. But also, she hesitated, struggling visibly with what came next, also conceptual. The neighborhood has changed. Our customers have changed. The things you said 10 years ago, you were right. The admission hung in the air between us, fragile and unprecedented. My mother had never, in my memory, acknowledged being wrong about anything significant. We need help, she continued when I didn't immediately respond. Your father suggested I come to you. He says you help restaurants like ours now. I do, I confirmed, my mind already racing through possibilities, restructuring options, modernization strategies, potential investors. Your brother and sister don't know I'm here, she added. They wouldn't approve. Especially Marco. He's become rigid in his thinking. Like mother, like son, I thought but didn't say. Instead, I asked the question that really mattered. Why now, Mom? It's been 10 years. Surely the problems didn't just start yesterday. She looked down at her hands, weathered from decades of work, the nails short and practical. Pride, she said simply. My pride. I couldn't admit that you might have been right to leave, right about what the restaurant needed. She met my eyes again. And fear. That you would turn us away. As I turned you away. The pain in her voice was real, as was the effort it took her to come to me. My mother had always been many things: stubborn, demanding, sometimes harsh but never insincere. I'll need to see your books, I said, my tone more businesslike than I felt. All of them, not just what you show the IRS. And I'll need honest answers about everything: staffing issues, supplier relationships, property situation. She nodded, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. Whatever you need. I'm not promising anything, I warned. If the situation is as bad as I suspect, there might not be a path to saving Sabre di Casa in its current form. I understand, she said, though I could see the idea pained her. But if anyone can find a solution, it's you. She paused, then added quietly, you always were the smartest of my children. The compliment, so long withheld, loosened something tight in my chest. Not forgiveness, not yet, but perhaps the possibility of it. I'll come by the restaurant tomorrow evening, I said. After closing. I don't want to disrupt service, and I think it's better if I see everything before talking to Marco and Lucia. The next evening, I arrived at Sabre di Casa after the last customers had departed. The familiar bell above the door chimed as I entered, triggering a wave of nostalgia so strong it nearly stopped me in my tracks. The restaurant looked smaller than I remembered. The decor unchanged, and a deck of the same colorful tiles my father had imported from Mexico. The same hand-painted mural, depicting our ancestral village, the same worn wooden chairs that had supported thousands of diners over the years. The restaurant was empty except for my father wiping down tables, my mother counting out the register, and a young woman I didn't recognize cleaning the service station. The smell of cumin, chilies, and corn tortillas hung in the air, instantly transporting me back to childhood. My father looked up at the sound of the bell, his face breaking into a smile warmer than any he'd shown me in years. Isa? He said, using my childhood nickname for the first time since our estrangement. You came. I said I would, I replied, slipping into our familiar pattern of brief, direct exchanges. My father had always been a man of few words, preferring to express himself through his cooking and quiet acts of support. The others will be here soon, my mother said, approaching with uncharacteristic hesitation. I told them we were having a family meeting about the restaurant's future. I didn't specify that you would be here. I raised an eyebrow. That seems like an important detail to omit. She had the grace to look slightly abashed. I was afraid Marco might refuse to come. And now he'll just walk out when he sees me? I challenged. My father stepped in with his typical peacemaking gesture, a hand raised slightly. Let's sit. Have something to eat first. I made your favorite. Despite the tension, my stomach growled at the mention of food. My father's chili rellenos had been my requested birthday dinner for 18 years straight. The thought that he remembered, that he had prepared them specifically for my return, softened some of my defensive posture. We settled at the large corner table, where our family had always taken meals between lunch and dinner service. The young woman introduced as Carmen. Lucia's assistant manager brought out platters of food and then tactfully disappeared into the kitchen. My father served me with the same care he'd always shown, selecting the best relleno for my plate, adding exactly the right amount of rice and beans. As we ate, my mother began outlining the restaurant's situation in her characteristically blunt manner. The building's owner had died and his son was raising their rent by 60%. A new development was slated for the block across the street, bringing higher-end restaurants that would further transform the neighborhood. Their profit margins had been shrinking steadily for the past 5 years as ingredient costs rose, but menu prices remained static. My mother's stubborn insistence on keeping things accessible to the community. We've lost 3 of our longtime cooks in the past year, she continued, pushing food around her plate without eating much. Younger ones want higher wages than we can offer. And customers. She sighed, a sound so defeated it startled me coming from her. Many of our regulars have been priced out of the neighborhood. The newer residents want authentic Mexican, but also expect craft cocktails and gluten-free options. I nodded, making mental notes. The problems were significant but not necessarily fatal. Before I could respond, the bell above the door chimed again. My sister Lucia entered first, still as vibrant as I remembered but more polished, her wild curls now cut into a sleek bob. She stopped short when she saw me, eyes widening in shock. And was that pleasure, Isa? Oh my God. She rushed forward, enveloping me in a hug before I could stand. Why didn't you tell me she was coming? She demanded of our parents, though her tone held no real anger. Behind her, my brother Marco stood frozen in the doorway, his chef's coat unbuttoned over a t-shirt, his expression unreadable. He had our father's build now, solid and imposing, but his eyes were all our mother, dark and tense, and currently filled with suspicion. "What is this?" he asked, directing the question to our mother, while keeping his eyes fixed on me. "Your sister is here to help us," my father said firmly. "Sit down, Marco. Eat something." "Help us how?" Marco remained standing, his posture rigid with hostility. I met his gaze directly. "Mom came to my office yesterday. She told me about the financial situation, the rent increase, the changing neighborhood. This is what I do now, Marco. I help restaurants navigate exactly these kinds of challenges." "We don't need your corporate solutions," he snapped. "This isn't one of your investment projects." "No." I agree calmly. "It's our family legacy. Which is why I'm here as your sister first, consultant second." Lucia tugged at his arm. "Sit down, Marco. At least listen." For a moment, I thought he might walk out. Then our father said quietly, "Please, hi Joe," for me. The simple request penetrated Marco's anger. He reluctantly took a seat, positioned as far from me as the table allowed. Lucia settled beside me, radiating nervous energy as she served herself. "I've reviewed the preliminary information Mom provided," I began, slipping into my professional mode. "The situation is serious but not necessarily terminal. However, any solution will require significant changes to how Sabre de Casa operates." Marco's jaw tightened, but he remained silent. "What kind of changes?" Lucia asked, her expression open and curious. I outlined my initial thoughts: a menu redesign that preserves signature dishes, but added higher margin items appealing to newer neighborhood residents, a revamped beverage program, including local craft beers and cocktails using traditional Mexican spirits, operational adjustments to reduce food waste and labor costs, and a modest rebranding that honored the restaurant's history while signaling its evolution. "The physical space needs updating too," I continued. "Not a complete overhaul, but enough to justify raising prices and attracting new customers while keeping our loyal base." "And how do we pay for all this?" Marco interrupted, his tone skeptical. "If we had money for renovations and rebranding, we wouldn't be in this situation." "That's the part one need to work out," I admitted. "There are options: small business loans, finding investors, possibly even crowdfunding given the restaurant's history in the community. But first, I need to conduct a thorough assessment of your financial situation." My mother exchanged a glance with my father, something unspoken passing between them. "There's another complication," she said carefully. "The bank has already denied us for a loan twice." This was new information, and it raised immediate red flags. "Why?" Another uncomfortable silence. Finally, my father sighed. "Tax issues. When your mother took over the books after you left, there were some mistakes." I could read between the lines. "How bad?" "We owe back taxes," my mother admitted. "And there may be discrepancies in our reported income for several years." The first 6 months of our restaurant revival plan were the hardest of my professional life. Negotiating with the IRS was a bureaucratic nightmare that required every ounce of my patience and expertise. We eventually secured a reasonable settlement agreement, but it meant my parents had to liquidate most of their modest retirement savings. The guilt on my mother's face when she signed those papers haunted me, though I reminded her repeatedly that the alternative potential criminal charges for tax evasion would have been far worse. Finding the right investors proved equally challenging. Most wanted too much control or pushed for dramatic concept changes that would have stripped away Sabre de Casa's soul. After dozens of meetings and presentations, we finally partnered with a small hospitality group specializing in preserving legacy restaurants. They took a 30% ownership stake in exchange for capital investment and operational expertise, leaving our family with controlling interest. The renovation closed the restaurant for 6 weeks, the first time in 30 years it had been dark, for more than a holiday weekend. Marco practically lived on site during this period, obsessively monitoring every change to ensure the kitchen redesign met his exacting standards. My father wandered the construction zone like a ghost, touching familiar walls before they were repainted, salvaging small mementos from features being replaced. My mother threw herself into community outreach, personally inviting longtime customers to our reopening celebration. Lucia surprised us all with her marketing savvy, creating a social media presence that highlighted our family story and culinary heritage. She organized a photo session capturing my father and Marco cooking together, their hands moving in identical rhythms as they prepared family recipes. The images became the centerpiece of our rebranding, a visual promise that while Sabre de Casa was evolving, its heart remained unchanged. As for me, I split my time between Chicago and my consulting business in New York, exhausting myself with red-eye flights and endless video conferences. I hired 2 new staff members to handle my client load and trained my associate Raj to take over day-to-day operations, preparing my company for my eventual relocation. Each sacrifice felt necessary, each challenge worth overcoming, though I couldn't fully articulate why even to myself. The reopening night arrived on a perfect June evening. The newly installed front windows were opened wide to the street, letting in warm summer air and the sounds of the neighborhood. String lights twinkled across the expanded patio, where new wooden tables complemented the original tiles my father had hand-selected decades earlier. Inside, the dining room balanced modern touches with nostalgic elements my grandmother's hand-embroidered, textiles framed on freshly painted walls, vintage family photos alongside contemporary local artwork. I stood in the kitchen doorway watching my mother greet guests, her smile genuine for the first time in months as she embraced old friends and welcomed new faces. My father and Marco worked side by side at the line, their movements synchronized despite the new equipment surrounding them. Lucia floated between tables with her young daughter in tow, the child proudly handing out small tokens of appreciation to our guests. In that moment, seeing my family united in purpose, if not yet fully reconciled in heart, I understood why I had returned despite the painful history. Some bonds transcend grievances. Some connections remain even when stretched across years of silence. The restaurant wasn't just a business to be saved. It was the physical manifestation of our shared heritage, the place where the complicated, imperfect love of the Santos family found its clearest expression. My mother caught my eye across the crowded room and raised her glass slightly in acknowledgement. I returned the gesture, our first moment of true mutual respect in a decade. There was still work to be done, both in the restaurant and in our relationship, but the foundation for both had been rebuilt stronger, more flexible, and ready for whatever challenges came next. 1 year after our reopening, Sabre di Casa was not just surviving but thriving. Our revenue had increased by 40%, customer demographics had diversified while maintaining our core community support, and we paid down a significant portion of the tax debt. The updated menu featuring both my father's classic dishes and Marco's modern interpretations had earned a glowing review in the Chicago Tribune, bringing in diners from across the city. More importantly, our family dynamic had gradually transformed. The weekly management meetings that initially crackled with tension had evolved into productive strategy sessions followed by shared meals where conversation occasionally ventured beyond business into personal territory. Marco and I had developed a grudging respect that sometimes resembled our childhood closeness. Lucia had blossomed in her expanded role, revealing leadership abilities that none of us had fully appreciated before. The most profound change, however, was in my relationship with my mother. We were not best friends. Too much history and too many fundamental differences in worldview prevented that, but we had found a new way of engaging that allowed both of us to feel seen and respected. She had finally acknowledged my professional expertise, while I had come to appreciate the fierce dedication to family that had driven her harsh decisions. I was wrong, she told me one evening as we closed the books on another successful month. 10 years ago, when I said you weren't committed to this family, you just saw a different way to honor our legacy. Coming from Elena Santos, this admission was monumental. I accepted it with a simple nod, knowing that elaborate forgiveness speeches would only make us both uncomfortable. We each have different gifts, I replied. The restaurant needs all of them to succeed. She smiled, the new lines around her eyes crinkling. Your grandmother used to say that about you, that you had a different kind of gift. I was too stubborn to listen. Well, I said lightly, I inherited that stubbornness from somewhere. She laughed, a full-throated sound I had rarely heard growing up. True enough. Your father always said you and I fought because we're too much alike. Maybe he was right, I conceded. Though I prefer to think I got his patience too. Some of it, perhaps. She closed the ledger. We've been reviewing a modern accounting system now, though she still insisted on printing monthly reports she could touch. You're happy now? With this arrangement? The question contained layers of meaning. Was I happy with the restaurant's progress, with my role in the family business, with the partial life I'd rebuilt in Chicago? I considered my answer carefully. I'm content, I said finally. The restaurant is secure. My company in New York is stable with Raj at the helm, and being part of Sabre di Casa again feels right in a way I didn't expect. She nodded, satisfied with my honesty if not entirely pleased with the answer. And the future? Will you stay? Eventually. It was a question I'd been asking myself for months. My condo in New York still contained most of my possessions.